Okay, everyone, welcome to this edition of the Irish Megaphone. I was on the Niall Boylan radio show last night. They were discussing euthanasia. Now, Emmanuel Godson was also on the show, and he made some very, very good points. Now, I'm going to leave a link below to the full discussion. It was about an hour long. I was on for the last 20 minutes or so, but if you want to hear the full discussion, then just click on the link below and you can get the full hour there. So what we're going to listen to here now is just my particular contribution over the last 20 minutes. Now, I had been listening to the show when I came home last night, and I started listening to what was going on. They were talking about euthanasia, and there was one particular thing that kind of got me a little bit irate. There was a chap on, and he was talking about how, it's okay for God to murder people in the Old Testament, but if we start killing people, then there's a problem with it. Now, I hear this argument a lot on YouTube and in comment sections, and I've heard it on this radio show before. So I did bring this up during the discussion, and I kind of talked about how they always use the argument of the Old Testament where God killed people or ordered the Israelites to kill people. And what I tried to say, or I explained in the discussion, that there was actually good reason behind that most people are not aware of, or maybe are not educated enough in what the Bible says to understand that, in the sense that, like, these Old Testament tribes, like the Canaanites and the Moabites and so forth, what they would do is they would boil children alive, make human sacrifices. And in fact, the screams of the mothers were so loud that they would beat drums louder and louder to drown out the screams, And, you often hear this argument, and what I forgot to mention in the show, in passing while I was talking, which you'll hear it now in a minute, is the one thing I did forget to mention is that, you hear people like this and they talk a lot about, about all the evil in the world and why doesn't God do something about it? But then when you show them an example, as in this case here, where God does do something about it, they kind of scoff and take the perspective that, look, God is murdering people, so it's sometimes you just can't win with people, So look, we're just going to get straight into it. This is just before I came on, and I'm using my usual pseudonym, Tim, which stands for the Irish Megaphone, T.I.M. So I hope you enjoy it and get something out of it. Okay, take care. Bye-bye.
Let me just go. Well, hang on. Can you all stay there, because I have to take a break, and I'd like you all to stay there. But Tim, I want to come to you straight after the break, all right? So please stay with me. Now, if Emmanuel was really clever, he might say cancer, etc., appears due to things mankind decides to create for profit. Free will smokers, will smokes to industrial and nuclear, etc. Tom and Kildare. I have no idea, Tom, what you're talking about. I assuming it's some sort of weird conspiracy theory. Whereas it says, Niall, 85% of this country are Catholics. Please stop disrespecting them and don't be so silly. People will never vote for this. Well, you probably would have said the same thing about same-sex marriage and abortion too, wouldn't you? But that did happen. Oh my God, how could Anya be so cold, says Darianne. And she said, who says it's part of the human condition? We're entitled to dignity when it comes to dying. Tim, you're on Classic Hits. How you doing, Tim?
Tim, hello. I'm calling you Tim. Hi, Niall. How are you?
How are you doing, Tim?
Is that Emmanuel Godson you have there?
I have no idea, actually.
Is he still there? Is that you, Emmanuel?
Yeah. Oh, hey, Tim. How's it going?
It's a bit of a love in here tonight, lads. Yeah.
Anyway, look, Niall, I was just listening there to the conversation over the last half an hour, and look, I just hear a lot about dying with dignity, And the thing is, like, that dying, the process of dying in itself is, can quite often not be a very dignified process. I saw that with my parents when my parents died, and sometimes, I think it's kind of, I think, dying is a part of life. I know Emmanuel was kind of saying that, just as being born is a part of life, and going through suffering and pain is also a part of life, So
it's not a nice part of life, is it?
Of course it's not a nice part of life.
I mean, being sick, for example, and suffering, as you say, is not a part of life. And if a God exists, right, surely he created men who are talented and women who are talented enough to make us feel better and cure us sometimes as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. But if you look back through the centuries, look, like, for example, like the reason I believe, I'll come to that point in a second now, but like the reason I believe, first of all, euthanasia or any type of killing, like abortion, premeditated killing, is wrong, is because...
I think abortion is a different argument,
It's a different argument, yeah, but what I mean is, what I'm trying to say is that, like the Bible says, thou shalt not kill. That's one of the basic 10 Commandments.
I think morally, even whether you're a Christian or not, you agree with that. We all agree with that. Morally.
Yeah, well, I am a Christian. I grew up a Catholic. I converted to Christianity later.
but I'm an atheist, right? And I still believe we don't kill, we don't steal, we don't covet our neighbours' goods or whatever. I believe in all that.
Yeah, but the reason, let's say, let's just take it from a biblical point of view for a second. The reason killing is wrong is because what separates mankind is that man is made in God's image.
Like, but what is your definition of killing somebody? To me, killing somebody is doing it without their consent.
Well, that would be I would define that as murder.
Well, no, murder is premeditated,
It's absolutely premeditated. Yeah, but you can also, you can also persuade. If you look, for example, you remember in 1978 the Jim Jones cult in South America. Like all those people committed suicide, and many of them did it willingly. And I know some of them didn't, but nonetheless they all went along with it because they were programmed or persuaded by this guy Jim Jones to go along with that. And many of them probably thought, yeah, we're doing the right thing,
But what, can I ask you a question? Don't take this disrespectfully, and I know yourself and Emmanuel are Christians. What's the difference of Jim Jones or Waco or any of the Manson family or any of these cults? What is the difference between them and Catholicism or Islam or any other religion, apart from the fact that they're much bigger and they read from a different book or a different hymn sheet?
Well, I think it's, if I open the Bible, for example, and I can come up with one interpretation. Like, for example, take Jim Jones as a perfect example. Like, I would classify someone like him as a cult leader or the group of individuals. I think the classic definition of a lot of cults, I've often spoken to, say, Mormons or people like that, or people who are involved in these kind of groups, is that you'll find that the leader or the doctrine behind the leader is very controlling over people's lives.
But surely Catholicism is controlling as well.
Well, I suppose I said I grew up as a Catholic. My parents were very, very religious, and I have to admit, when I listened to, as I grew up and I saw my mum's life, my mum would have grown up in the 1920s, 1930s. My dad the same, and I could see a certain amount of control over their lives, or a sense of religiosity. Now, when I say religiosity, what I mean is a sense of doing, saying, and going. In other words, I have to keep earning my way to God by doing. If I go to Mass enough times, or if, you know what I mean, or if I say
but Jim Jones himself believes in God, and he claimed that all his followers were disciples of Christ. And
the Bible says that the devil believes in God, but that, you know what I mean? Many people believe in God.
Okay, but getting back to this argument, and you heard Dave, and you heard Kathy, by the way, who says she's a Catholic and a practicing Catholic, and she watched her husband, who was a very fit and well man up to this time last year, suddenly get diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, and literally, as she described it herself, turn into from 14 stone to a bag of bones, where literally the bones were sticking out through his skin. I mean, that is a horrific way to watch somebody you love die. And he reached out at one point before he went into semi-consciousness and asked to have his life taken, and nobody could help him.
Yeah.
I mean, how can you justify your argument to Kathy?
Right. What do you think my argument is to Kathy?
Well, I imagine your argument to Kathy is that we don't have the right to take somebody's life.
Well,
even if they've requested it.
Well, my argument is more that suffering is a part of life.
No. The suffering in cancer, I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy.
Sorry to interrupt you there, Kat, but just to come back to your original question, Niall, you were on about...
No, that cancer, the way it eats away with you, when you're being moved on a bed constantly because your bones are like bits of scissors sticking through your body, and they're putting little pillows under you, try and lie this way, try and lie that way, and you're crying in pain. Oh, my God, no way. No way.
I understand the point you make of a Christian view.
Just your original question when I first came on was about, maybe I'm not wording it correctly now, but was about how, surely, if God is a good God, surely he can invent, people can invent things to do away with all the suffering. But if you look back over the centuries, going back 2,000 years since the time of Christ, medicine, like God is a creative God. I believe what sets mankind apart from the animals is that, you don't see a dog going down the beach and going, that's a lovely sunset there. That's why mankind is creative, because it's made in the image of God, who is also creative. So if you look through the centuries, mankind has progressed with technology. Man has used that creative skill to develop technology, and in the area of medicine has developed many techniques and technologies to heal many, many, many diseases. And that's been a progressive thing over the centuries. Now, I would hope that man will continue to be creative, and God willing, there'll be a time at some stage where mankind will conquer many horrible, horrible diseases or cancers. Do you know what I mean? So,
sorry, Dave, are you still there?
Yo.
Yeah, you've been listening there to what Tim is saying, and obviously from a Christian point of view, Tim believes what he's saying, and he believes it to be factually correct, and what he's saying, and that, this suffering that your dad went through, your father-in-law went through, that Kathy's husband went through, and that my friend went through. I mean, this is part of human suffering, and it's part of life, and this is, and the majority of the population believe in a God of some description. This is what their God decides.
Yeah, but see, all I keep hearing from the religious argument is, killing is bad unless God does it. And if God does it, it's part of his divine plan. And
yeah, but okay, hold on a second. It's Dave, is it? Is your name Dave, yeah?
Yeah.
Look, Dave, before I came on there, I heard you talking about, you mentioned I hear this a lot. I see it in comments on YouTube or wherever about, isn't God awful? Isn't God a murderer because he killed so many people in the Old Testament? And most people who say that don't actually understand the reason behind that. If you go back and look to those stories in the Old Testament, the reason God was killing those people or ordered the Israelites to kill those people is if you look into the practices of the people he ordered to kill, most of these people, like the Canaanites, they used to boil babies alive. They used to, engage in human sacrifices and things like that. Really evil, wicked deeds.
Yeah, but they didn't all do it.
Okay, well, how about...
No. Let me just go back to that, because they didn't all do it. Let's say, for example, if we look at Islam at the moment, for example, there are some very wicked people who believe in, Muhammad and who believe in Allah. But the majority of Muslims are not like that. They don't engage in that kind of terrorism. So we don't go out and just, put a death sentence on every Muslim, but that's what God did at the time.
Of course not. But what I'm saying is the stories in the Old Testament are descriptive. They're not prescriptive. So if you look at a lot of Islamic doctrine, it's prescriptive. In other words, if you're a good Muslim, I'm going by the very strict letter of the law now. If you're a good Muslim, then you should do A, B, C, and D. Whereas the stories in the Old Testament are historically descriptive of what happened at a certain point in time. Do you see the difference between one being prescriptive, one being descriptive?
Sorry, Dave, go ahead.
Yeah, no, but I was going to say, what was the story in the Bible? Was it Abraham that he told to bring him up onto a mountain and kill his first son to test him? That was God again, wasn't it?
It was, yes.
Do you not think that's kind of fucked up, no?
Because what it was it was an image of what would happen when Jesus came and died and when God gave his son. If you look at the... I'm sorry, and I mean no disrespect when I say this, right? But have you ever actually been in that position? Have you ever had to help change your parents' nappy? Have you ever had to do... I actually have, funny enough.
And you still think...
Yes, I have. At one stage, I looked after my mum for a few years before she died, so I know all about that.
And you've been through that, and yet you still don't think when someone's in excruciating pain at the end of their life, we shouldn't do them a kindness and just turn off the lights?
No, because it's not my position or anyone else's position to take someone else's life.
But
having said that,
I mean, the point Dave was making, Tim, if you were sitting there, with your dad or your mum or your brother or sister, and gosh, I hope it doesn't happen to any of them, and you never have to go through that. Mm-hmm. But you're sitting there, and they're in the final stages of death, in a hospice, for example, as Kathy would have been, but they're compos mentis. But yet physically they're in great agony, and yes, they'd be on morphine, but morphine doesn't always work or dull all the pain. And they said to you, Tim, this is hypothetical, of course. Yeah. Tim, there's 2 tablets there and a glass of water. Would you just pop them into me and feed them to me? And please let me die with a little bit of peace. I can't go on like this. You'd say no.
Well, it certainly if I was in that situation, thank God I've never been in that situation. I was in that situation, but it's an incredibly difficult circumstance to be in. And I can
do it.
It is an absolutely difficult circumstance to be in. I personally wouldn't do it. I wouldn't feel. I wouldn't.
I think you would.
I wouldn't have peace with myself. I wouldn't have peace with myself.
Wouldn't that not be the compassionate as a Christian? Would that not be the compassion in you that would do that? Because look, doctors do it every day, don't they? When doctors go in and see somebody like Kathy's husband in the final stages of death, and they go, I'm going to turn this morphine up to you, whatever it is, 20 milligrams per hour, or whatever the hell it is.
That's how they kill off people in hospitals. I learned that from my parents. This is a lot of people in Ireland think there's no euthanasia.
Well, there is, because they turn up morphine pumps.
They just pump morphine into them.
Yeah, but is that not a good thing?
But it depends on what you.
They're going to die anyway.
Well, of course it is. If it alleviates pain in someone who's greatly suffering, of course it's a good thing. But my point
is that not hypocritical?
You're on about compassion.
Is that not hypocritical? Because you just said that's a good thing, and that essentially is euthanasia.
No, Niall, you're putting words in my mouth now. What I said was that it's a good thing if it alleviates pain.
But is that not what the final stage of death is?
Not necessarily. It's there to just finish someone off. Do you know what I mean? But
Yeah, sorry, Dave.
Sorry,
Emmanuel. You want to say? Hang on, Dave. Sorry, Emmanuel. You want to say something?
I think Tim is pointing out the obvious here that we're not talking about standing back and folding our arms and doing nothing. We're intervening with medication to take away the pain, but we're definitely not deciding to take their lives. That's the point.
We are somewhat, and I think by Tim's own admission, that when you go into a hospital and somebody's in the final stages of cancer, and I witnessed it many, many years ago with somebody I knew and loved as well, that they were at home and they had been dying for about 2 weeks, and the doctor said, and this was through the God, he came along to me and to another relation outside in the hallway and said, listen, this could go on for another week. And we said, he can't go through this for another week. And he said, well, I have two options. You can leave it the way it is, it could go on for another week, or if you want me to, I can turn up the morphine. And he said, probably about 24 hours the most. And we said, okay, fire away. That's euthanasia, isn't it, Tim? But it's compassion, isn't it, as well?
Well, I suppose it's compassion in the sense that it's helping a person alleviate a lot of the physical pain and suffering they're going through, you know. But it's a very difficult situation. It's a difficult situation to be in. I admit that, you know. I'm not saying I know everything perfectly. I'm just talking about a situation where, like, for example, there was a lady in Belgium last week. I think it was she had dementia, and she had agreed, while she still had her full mind, she had agreed to that if she ever got to, if the dementia progressed to the stage where she couldn't make her own decisions, that her family would essentially euthanize her. Mm-hmm. Now, what happened, I can't remember where I read it now, was it in the paper or online? But what happened last week is that when they went to euthanize her, that she actually stood up and resisted. Oh, no, sorry, it was the court case that was last week. My apologies. Now, the court ruled in favour of the family, but basically, when the time came to euthanize her, she actually started to resist and stood up, but they still overpowered her and forced euthanize her, so to speak. Now, the court came out on the family side at the end of I think it was a court case that.
Well, you know, I personally wouldn't agree with that, because
no
matter what condition a person was in, if they say I don't want to die, you don't do it.
Well, that's
murder.
When I talk about euthanasia, I suppose that's really what I'm talking about.
I think, no, don't get me wrong. I mean, if there was legislation for euthanasia, I think there has to be very strict guidelines around it, and the person must be able to make the decision themselves and must be conscious to make those decisions. I don't ever believe we should make decisions. But at the same time, it's still a form of suicide. It's still a form of killing. You know, we all know that murdering someone is wrong. Suicide was illegal in this country.
But I would believe that I believe as a Christian that killing oneself is also wrong, because, you know, at the end of the day, it still comes back to we are made in God's image.
But haven't we changed? Hasn't our understanding of human life changed so much that in the past, you and Emmanuel and the rest of us would have all known that, you know, taking your own life was always very, very taboo according to the Catholic Church. I mean, you weren't even allowed to bring a coffin into the church, for God's sake, or be buried in consecrated ground. But now that seems to have gone away, and the church has evolved somewhat to the understanding that people do have mental health problems and sadly take their own lives.
Yeah, I understand. Of course, the church has evolved. People change, but nonetheless, if you like, God's word remains the same as it was 2,000 years ago. God's standards haven't changed. Just because society and fashions change and culture changes, God's standards, if you like,
but God's standards were written 2,000 years ago, and God's standards have changed. When we look at society now, we couldn't live our lives by the Bible.
Well, I try as best I can. I
absolutely.
Don't do it perfectly.
I'm not saying you do. Of course you do. But you don't live your life as people would 2,000 years ago. And, you know, the people who wrote the Bible 2,000 years ago.
In what sense do I not? What do you mean by that?
I think our values change over time, as I think society's values change over time. I mean, I'm a conservative, Tim, and I'm sure, I don't know whether you follow me on Twitter or anything like that.
Yeah, I do. I've actually tweeted you a few times. But
I consider myself conservative.
But it depends, I suppose, Niall, it depends what your values are rooted in.
I mean, I value life. I do value life. You know, and I've spoken very openly about the abortion referendum, for example.
I know you do, yeah. I know that.
And I have valued life. But I think when it comes to somebody choosing, an adult person choosing to take their own life because they're going to die of a terminal illness and asking for assistance in some way to do that medically, to die with a level of dignity, I think I would have a different view.
Well, I suppose, like, what I would say as well there, Niall, is that I'm kind of looking at, well, yes, I'm looking at it from a Christian perspective, right? So there's the physical. If you think of the body, if you like, the person is made up of three parts, I believe. You have the physical body, the soul, which is the emotions, and the spirit. So while the idea of euthanasia or painkilling deals with the physical side of a person's nature, there's also a spiritual side, you know, because the Bible clearly says that we all have spirits, and that when we die, the spirit leaves the body. You know, so like if you look at suffering, sometimes, like I believe that God, the whole message of the gospel is to have a personal relationship with the Lord. And the thing is that if someone, say for example, in a specific situation, has rejected God all their life, and sometimes, like there was a good friend of mine who had a very serious illness in hospital there. He actually died last week, but a few years ago. And I went out, and he was in a really bad way. I had to put my ear up to his mouth to hear him, you know. And I said to him, you know what? God is shouting at you. And sometimes God, like I once heard a guy say once a quote. He said, you know, I turned to God when my life was falling apart, only to find that it was God who was shaking the foundations of my life. And sometimes God, I believe, uses disease or serious circumstances like that to get someone's intention in their life. Do you know what I mean? Because
okay, well, don't get me wrong. I completely disagree with you, Tim, but I respect,
I
respect your view on it.
And I
tell you what, the whole God conversation is a bigger conversation that we could have another time.
It is, yeah. It is, yeah.
All right, listen, Tim, thanks very much indeed. All right. Okay, loads and loads of people texting in relation to that. Loads of people will have a view, obviously, on it. And I do believe it's probably the next referendum.
Real people, real opinions, real talk radio. The multi-award-winning Niall Boylan Show.
Classic